Hello everyone, I am Swara Joshi from the Department of English, and today we are here for translation studies. One of the topics, translation, transcreation and interpretation, and understanding the differences between the three. So before we get into the topic, have you ever gone through the funniest mistranslation, funniest misinterpretations, funniest transcreations, or rather I should say a too much of excessive, full of hyperbole experience? Well, that's what we're going to discuss it today, and what's the difference between them. So translation, as we have already studied numerous times, and we know that translation is when you convert one language to another language, that is when you convert source language into target language, right? But what is transcreation? Okay, so let's imagine transcreation as a song remake, okay, a retro song remake in which words are same, lyrics is same, but the emotions, the value, the content, the vibe that song has is more or less the same. But how the generation of today's time is pursuing it, or how it has been made certain changes according to the given period of time, that is what transcreation is. So transcreation is translation plus creation. You can say when you are working on the creativity level, including translation, that is what transcreation is. So it goes beyond word for word translation. You just need to focus on the emotion, the content, the tone, what kind of work it was, and what kind of a work you have to make in order to accommodate with the people. So focuses on the emotions, just now as I said, focuses on the tone, intent and cultural resonance. Most important thing, for which culture you are transcreating that piece of work. For example, we watch movies and then we see subtitles. Okay, now certain subtitles are come up with word for word translation, but at the same time when we see, there are certain kind of subtitles, or per to say dubbing, which are done according to the demographic the film is catering to. Maybe the dialogue which is being spoken for the US demographic is very different from the dialogue which is being transcreated for the Indian demographic. Okay, so transcreation is when translation meets creativity. Simple. So transcreation is also known as creative adaptation, when you adapt certain things but in a creative manner, but you enhance it with certain emotions, you enhance it with certain cultural significance or tone. Moving ahead, it involves reimagining the original content for a new cultural and emotional context. It's not something that you are removing the base. You keep the original thing, but you decorate it in certain other manners according to the demographic that you are catering to. So always remember, in transcreation, the content will always be the original content that you will be working on. So it aims to maintain the intent, tone and impact, not just the meaning. Indeed, meaning plays a very significant role, even context plays a very significant role. So out of these two, majorly in transcreation, we focus on the context, and most importantly, there is a word that you can see here is impact. What kind of an impact that you want to make on the demographic or the people you are catering to. So moving ahead. Now, these are certain points which claims that what is transcreation, how is it useful, what are the characteristics of transcreation, you can say. But before that, we'll just take a jump on a topic, we'll see a topic. Let's come to an example which says McDonald's in India. So in original, as in the name, the burger which is there in US is known as Big Mac. Okay. But as you see in the Indian menu of McDonald's, you will be focusing more on the Maharaja Mac. What and why did anyone choose Maharaja Mac? It was as simple as Big Mac. Why Maharaja Mac? just to adapt to the Indian demographic. As it's written, Big Mac doesn't mean anything special in India, because people might not relate with it, or even if they, but not at the same level the way they are relating with the Maharaja Mac. Okay, so it means, it's giving the royal look, it's giving the Indian look to it, and that's what transcreation is all about. So starting with, everyone is not equally witty or expressive. See, it's not mandatory that a translator is just focusing on translating or converting one language to another. He or she also focuses on the creativity segment. Okay, so it's not mandatory that a translator is just a translator. He or she can be a writer as well, and a very expressive writer. Okay, because we in transcreation we focus on the creativity segment. A beautiful phrase in one language can sound awkward or even meaningless in other, which absolutely makes sense. Something which seems beautiful, which seems interesting, which seems funny in one language might not seem funny or interesting in the another language. The example which I have given you here, Big Mac and Maharaja Mac, like these two other things, maybe the Americans might not relate with the concept of Maharaja Mac. It might be something bizarre for them. It's not significant for them. What is the use of creating a name like Maharaja Mac? It's such an hyperbole thing that you're putting there. So maybe they might not relate with it, but we can. So that's what this point says, that a beautiful phrase in one language can sound awkward or meaningless in the another. Okay, and that is the reason why we don't focus on literal translation always. It's not that effective as compared to the sense for sense translation or even transcreation per se. Transcreation adds local color or cultural flavor to a text. Very important. It helps the reader connect emotionally with the message. Until and unless you will not get a proper reference to understand with, you will not be able to understand the entire text completely along with meaning and context. Okay, that's what transcreation is. Until unless you will feel the text, you will understand the emotions, you won't be able to relate with it. So hence we can say that transcreation there plays a very significant role. Moving ahead, we see transcreation is often seen as adaptation and not pure translation. And it's way more common in non-Western traditions, as I have mentioned here. Now, for example, we have Ramayana, one of the epics of our country. Now, if you will see the different regions and states of our country, there are different variations, different monologues, different stories, or different versions of Ramayana that are happening around the nation. Dravidian cultures have their own version, North Indian belt has its own version, maybe Northeastern has its own version, or to say East or West, right? Every single demographic works in their own manner. Maybe the way they depict Sita's character, it's a bit different from how the Northeastern might portray the look of goddess Sita. But the point here is the base story remains the same. The characters, the major characters of the entire Ramayana remains the same. But the variations are there, different, and according to the regions and according to the people. Okay, so it's way more, as I said, it's way more common in non-Western traditions, and it's kind of an adaptation. We are not purely translating it. We are just taking a bit of the basic of that story and then enhancing in our own manner, maybe giving it a different taste, give different variation to that. Some scholars look down upon transcreation. Yes, it's true. Some scholars are like, what is the need of transcreating certain things? Because if you take a very original thing and deviate or make it into something different, something way more expressive. Let's take the example of, say, Indian cuisine. Okay, let's take the example of, say, Rajma rice, Now it's a delicacy in India, a prominent one, but at the same time if you'll see a burrito bowl, it's more or less the same, you know. It has kidney beans, it also has kidney beans. It has rice, it also has rice. But it has other variations also. It has other add-ons also. But the base structure or the base requirement of that delicacy is the same. That is rice and kidney beans, right? So that's one of the contradictions here. But to make it valid, yes, it can make the original author famous due to the power of retelling. If the retelling gets applauded by the people, gets appreciated by the people, everyone would want to know how did this story emerge, how did the story come up, and eventually the saga continues and people will get to know, acha, this is the base through which the story has come. And then we say that here the original work also gets applauded. People would appreciate that as well. Okay. Last is modern use, advertising and branding. Now transcreation is something which is majorly used in the advertising segment or the branding segment. Central to the marketing, where emotional connection is everything, very important, because without emotional connection with the buyer, there cannot be any marketing done. So at the same time, if you see, there is another example that I have given to you. Intel, a well-known company that we all know. So originally, if you see the Intel, the entire name and the tagline for that is Intel, sponsors of tomorrow. But if you see its literal meaning, it's not giving a proper idea, a proper meaning to it. Okay, in some cultures it might not appreciate it. So, you know, at the same time, if you see in Portuguese, it sounded like more of Intel would deliver results later and not now. But and according to their own variation, how people would take it, what is the selling tagline for the people of, say, Portugal or Brazil, they both have different mindsets. So simultaneously, if you see, Intel in love with the future, that was their call. And it is subject to change from region to region and for people to people, how it is and what is the tagline, what is the selling tagline for their product. Okay, so it's most important to match their cultural emotions and passions with the people to sell it, and their transcreation is the king of that. Moving ahead, now when we see transcreation, translation, in the midst of that we have another topic, that is interpretation. People usually get confused that what is interpretation, how is it different from translation or transcreation. So if we see, interpretation is the process of converting spoken words. Have you ever been with a guide on a tour? When you're roaming, simultaneously you will see that he'll be narrating the experiences, they'll telling you the places, that all, how is the backstory of this place, what is the ancient story of this place, what is the significance of this place, and so on. That's what the interpretation is. Maybe the guides will be an Indian guide and the tourists are from, say, USA, and the guide knows Hindi or English, but according to the people, he or she might have to manage with the language, and simultaneously he'll be interpreting it in the language which is required by the tourists. Okay, so it is usually done in real time, most important thing. Second, it makes it quick. Third, it's dynamic, it's humongous, it's huge, it's not a small little concept, right? There are so many different variations to that, and most importantly, spontaneous in nature. Another thing, it's bidirectional. Now what is bidirectional? You cannot interpret, I mean you can, but in certain instances interpretation is a bidirectional thing. If I'll say something, you'll say something in response to that, or translating or interpreting it into the language that you want to, and then you'll speak about it. That's what bidirectional is, switch between two languages. Or if you are a interpreter, you'll speak in one, you'll understand in one, and then you'll speak in another one. Okay, Second is speed and clarity. You focus on the speed and clarity also, because the listeners who are there might not understand the language due to the inaccuracy of speed and clarity. Third is voice. You have to keep it clear, you have to keep it very sharp in order to convey your message. So interpreters don't translate word for word, they capture the essence, meaning, tone and intent. The basic difference between the transcreation and interpretation is it's written, transcreation is written and interpretation is spoken words. Okay. Now there are two main types of interpretation: simultaneous interpreting and consecutive interpreting. Now simultaneous interpreting is something, as the name suggests, we can see the interpreter speaks at the same time as the speaker. For example, somebody is saying in, say, Portugal language and the interpreter might be speaking in Hindi language or English language, but at the same time. So if you see certain places like conferences, UN meetings, live broadcasts, when there is a commentator in any of the sports, you see an interpreter who is speaking in English, for simultaneously there will be another interpreter speaking in some other language, okay, for the audience they are catering to. And at the same time, we have consecutive interpreting. The interpreter waits for the speaker to finish or pause before interpreting. So once the speaker finishes his or her line, the interpreter starts interpreting that particular message. Okay, so it's useful for interviews, medical consultants, courtrooms. Okay, there is an example which I mentioned here. A doctor in Germany talks to an Indian patient in German, then pauses while the interpreter translates it into Hindi. Okay, so something which happens spontaneously, simultaneously, and something which is happening by after giving a little break to the speaker and then explaining or interpreting the message to the listener. Moving ahead, we have what is the difference between, now that we understood what is translation, what is transcreation, what is interpretation, what is the difference between transcreation and translation? Now, transcreation specialists are writers, not just translators. As I said, informed you in the first slide, you might have seen the topic, which says that transcreators need not to be just good translators, but they have to be creative writers at the same time. So as I said, a transcreation is done by bilingual copywriters, not just copywriters. So you should be a master of couple of languages in order to be enhanced or to be great at transcreation, who know how to write it persuasively, keeping in mind the branding, the tone, the target audience. There are so many things that one needs to keep in mind while you're working on the transcreation. Second is, transcreation starts with a creative belief, continuing with the previous point that we studied, not just the source text. It's not important the way I receive the text, I'll forward the text in the same manner, but it is something which, if I'll get a plain text, I'll enhance it, I'll creatively add certain metaphorical words into it, figurative words into it, and then form a language and then form a beautiful piece out of it. That is what transcreation is. So translation begins with the source text and it is very important. But transcreation at the same time begins with a creative belief. Maybe you are giving me a very plain sentence. I might convert that entire sentence into a very poetry or a line or a sentence or a tagline or a slogan. Okay, keeping for whom I am transcreating it, who is my target audience, how I can emotionally connect with them, what is the desired action, For example, catering to US audience will be very different to catering to as compared to Indian audience. And both of them have their own emotional connects and target audiences and desired goals and everything. So in order to balance those things, one have to think in a very diverse, creative manner. So it's more like writing new marketing content for a different region. Transcreation is costlier indeed. Translation is something where you get paid and it's a very vague and it's a very not so sure amount, you can say. But if we see randomly, so paid per word is 1 to 5 word, but transcreation is something paid by the hour or project, like other creative services. In 1 hour, how much creative work you are doing, and accordingly you will be paid. So why more expensive? Includes cultural research, very important. So in order to focus the demographic, you have to study their culture, you have to study their ways and means, you have to study their ideation, you have to study how creative they are into specific segments, and accordingly you will deal with them. Testing headlines, slogans, and so on. For example, if you will take Maggie, it's a brand where if you will see the advertisements of it, they are mostly catering to the concept of motherly love. More than 2 minutes as their tagline, the selling point for them is the motherly love, the family connection, the bonding with friends. That is their selling point. Maybe if they are selling the same thing into Western countries, their selling point would be 2 minutes. So it differs from places to places. Transcreation creates new messages or new messaging. In translation, the messages stays the same. We do not change the meaning, the context of the text. If somebody is saying something, exactly I'll portray that same thing in the another language, of course keeping the message and the context same. But in transcreation, the message is recrafted to suit the culture, emotion, and the behavior of the target audience. So recrafted is a word where we can put emphasis on, or we can remember in order to remember transcreation. Transcreation is for creative, marketing focused copy. You are focusing on taglines, you are focusing on website pages which is acquirable by all the people around the regions, radios, TV advertisements, social media campaigns. These have to be creative in order to reach out to the demographic. But translation is something, technical manuals, legal contracts, product descriptions. For example, if you will get a manual how to join this table or how to make this table, the same instructions which are written in English language will be written in Hindi language. There will be no creative segment that will be adding to that particular thing, because the major focus in translation is to focus on the text, the focus on the message, the focus on the context. Okay, but transcreation adds the creative element to it. So transcreation is for emotional and persuasive content. Transcreation includes visual and design advising. Transcreators often advise on visuals including colors, fonts, imagery, because visual elements is something which attracts the buyers, which attracts the consumers to buy that particular product. And at times we don't even know how the product is, but after seeing its branding, how the marketing is done, we tend to buy it. And later on, maybe the product is not so good, but how did you buy it? Why did you buy it? Because of its marketing content. Okay, what works in one culture might offend or confuse another. So it varies from culture to culture. Okay, this is one of the most important things that one should remember for transcreation. Creative translation versus transcreation, a clarification. Now people might be confused with creative translation and people might be confused with transcreation. Creative translation is something a step above literal translation, modifies idioms, cultural references, keeps core structure intact. Something jo message hai, we are still sticking to that particular message. We are not moving ahead of that. Maybe a word or so, a sentence or so, where we are enhancing it in order to match the message of the source text in the target text. But transcreation is something full reworking of messages, may change entire structure, metaphor, concept, adapts brand voice and emotional intent. Zarur, it's not important that I'll keep the message same, but I might change it, okay, in order to enhance that particular thing. So lastly, if we see what is translation and what is transcreation, translation tells it, interpretation says it, and transcreation sells it. Okay. At the same time, if we see another example, translation is the recipe, remember that. Interpretation is the live cooking show. Transcreation is the fusion dish with the local spices. Okay, so just now what I did was transcreation to end the entire presentation into a very creative manner.